60 Years of Orioles Magic, a wonderful look back at the Orioles franchise since 1954 in both words and in photos. Now, the book was written by former Baltimore Sun beat writer and baseball journalist Jim Henneman. Now, part one of our conversation about how this book came together, Jim spoke about the love affair between the fan base in Baltimore and the franchise that has been building since 1954.
As a kid, when they first came here, I was 19 years old when they came here. So, I mean, it was like, I was in heaven. I mean, it was, as a lot of kids were my age, I'm sure. It took a while. This was not an easy transition. And even though it's hard for people to understand now, they made a big deal about whether or not they would draw 1 million people. But what people don't realize at the time is that drawing 1 million people wasn't a given everywhere. I mean, 1.5 million was a big attendance almost anywhere. So, when it really caught on, I'm not sure. Even in '66, I think it took the closeness of 60, 61, a little run in '64, and in '66, I think it kind of still caught people by surprise. I think they were kind of used to that close but no cigar syndrome. And I don't really think it was until the '69, '70, '71, and even into the best damn team in baseball era that it really became an issue. And part of that, frankly, was the fear of losing the team.
Brooks came along in the late 50s and obviously made a major impact. How critical was what he became to that part of the franchise?
I think it was extremely critical. I mean, they needed something. They needed something to hold on to, and it didn't happen overnight. I mean, Brooks first broke in '55, and it really wasn't until '60 that he really, became the player that we grew to know and love. He was up and down 55, 56, 57, 58. It really wasn't until 59. So there was a lot of sub 500 years involved there before they kind of broke through in '60. And there's no question that he was the guy. And there were some great defensive players here along before him and during his time. Chuck Deering was a great defensive player in center field. Willie Moran was a great defensive player at shortstop. Billy Hunter, in his 1 year that he was here, was a great defensive player. There were a lot of good defensive players. But as much as you hate to say it, people don't buy tickets to see defensive players. You have to have something else. But Brooks took that to the next level. I mean, I can still remember, one of my first jobs around the ballpark, because I lived close by, was as an usher. And I always tell people it's the only job that I ever had, or anybody ever had, maybe, where you start at the top and work your way down. But I can remember watching Brooks play from when I was watching games from the upper deck, and balls, it's like a two-base hit down the line. He catches the ball when it's passing. I mean, he just made some plays that were just so off the charts that he became the guy. I mean, there's no question about it. And he was the guy that set the whole thing in motion. I mean, there was a lot of help. Frank came on, everything turned around after Frank got here, but Boog was here, and McNally was here, and Blair was here, and there's a lot of other pieces to the puzzle. But Brooks was the guy that got it going, and Frank was the guy that turned it around, I think.
The trade for Frank for the '66 season, anyone who was on that team say that was the final piece. We had to get what he brought. And looking back on it, not only does he go out and win a Triple Crown, which hasn't been done except once since the following year with Yaz, but he also was the leader, even the kangaroo court and putting the wig on to mimic the old British judges and royalty. I mean, he not only did it on the field, he obviously had command of the clubhouse.
There was something there. I mean, I remember it vividly, him being here, and when he came in, and the kangaroo court was a big part of what they did. And, they only did kangaroo court after they won. I mean, you didn't have a kangaroo court, there was no fines and all that stuff after you got beat. But that was a part of his personality that didn't come ahead of him. He had a lot of, there was a lot of negative things you heard about Frank. That wasn't really, his clubhouse demeanor wasn't necessarily part of it. Now, whether that was because he was part of a Cincinnati clubhouse that had other more top-ranked guys, although it kind of be hard. I mean, here's a guy that was a star from day one. That was a part of his personality. I don't think anybody necessarily was waiting for, looking for, or expecting at all. But that became a big part of I think, the closest of the club. I think he had a lot to do with that. I really do.
Jim Palmer came up at 19 and eventually got into the rotation, which was a brilliant rotation. I mean, the one year, 4 guys winning 20 games. And on a great staff, he became the greatest of the great staff. Do you believe, having lived through and covered a lot of that, that those other guys forced him to be better because he knew how important pitching was and how good his teammates were?
Well, I think to a degree you could say that there were 2 other guys on that staff, who Steve Barber and Wally Bunker, who unfortunately suffered injuries that basically led to the end of their careers. I mean, Wally was a pitcher in the World Series and all, but he was not the pitcher he was at 19, which was before Jim came up. And Steve Barber had already been a 20-game winner. But they were, even though they were older than he was, they were still young guys. They weren't. I think Robin Roberts, and Jim talks about Robin Roberts all the time. It was his first roomie. He's the guy that I think that put in Palmer's mind the art of pitching. And and Jim's like a sponge. I mean, even today. I mean, we all know that. I mean, and he soaks stuff up and takes it in and doesn't forget, as we also know.